There we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the We the People National Finals. I'm Jen Patia-Howell. I'm the co-executive director of Virginia Civics. We are the home of the Virginia We the People program. This is going to be the Unit 2 hearing, and we'll start that in just a second. As a reminder to everyone, for the timing, I will be your timer. I'll hold up a 1-minute warning sign when appropriate and a time sign when appropriate. You'll have 4 minutes for your opening statement. And then you'll have 8 minutes of follow-up questions for these national finals. For everyone, I will mute my mic during the hearing. If you're not speaking, I suggest that you also mute your mic just to minimize any disturbances. I recommend that you use gallery view instead of speaker view. We'll start out with the judges introducing themselves. The students will introduce themselves and their coach. We'll go through the hearing process, and then at the conclusion, the judges will give some feedback before we wrap up. So with that, I am going to pass it over to the judges to introduce themselves.
Well, I guess I'll step in here. I'm Tim Moore from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's great to be here. And my colleagues are?
I'm Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney who lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
And our frozen. Lester is either frozen and or muted.
I think he's frozen. Let me give him a call.
Yeah. Anyway, Lester is a professor at a university in Maryland. And so he's, we'll try to get him here with us as quickly as possible. Could you introduce yourselves?
Good morning. My name is Avalon Lazorek, and I'm a senior at East Kentwood High School.
Hi, my name is Story Triplett. I'm also a senior at East Kentwood High School.
My name is Naomi Fenua, and I am also a senior at East Kentwood High School.
And my name is Eric Dubois, and I'm a senior at East Kentwood High School, and our coach is Justin Robbins.
Well, welcome. Grand Rapids, fantastic. We've selected question number 1 today. Jen, how are we doing on getting Lester back with us?
I have him on the phone. He's going to try to log back in. And if he is unable to, he's going to call in.
So I hear hold off for a second.
Let's give it just a minute.
Okay. There he is.
All right, friends, you should be all set.
Okay, apologize for that, everyone. Good morning. Now I can see you. Glad to see you.
We've already gone through the introductions, Lester.
Okay, so here is the question. Let's get right to it. Question number 1 for Unit 2. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? Okay, we're ready for your response.
Delegates gathered in Philadelphia to address the defects of the Articles of Confederation within the tumultuous context of economic recession, armed uprising of Shays' Rebellion, and a growing interest in solution seeking. However, delegates at the convention proffered vastly divergent views of the role of the people.
For example, Alexander Hamilton sought a monarchical approach where qualified elites ruled in the best interests of the people, while James Madison sought to refine the people's views through political elites. James Wilson argued that true sovereignty rested only with the people, favoring direct election of the legislature and president.
Ensuing disagreements centered on the structure of representation, as Madison's Virginia plan featured a singular executive with a bicameral proportional legislature, while William Patterson offered the New Jersey plan with a plural executive and a unicameral legislature with equal representation among states.
In debate, Wilson walked both sides of the aisle. He warned against New Jersey plan's small legislative body and opposed a plural executive, but worried about the cost of having too many representatives. Meanwhile, Madison asserted lack of national power to address common defense, interstate economics, and potential for tyranny of the minority would reproduce the failures of the Articles.
Eventually, delegates adopted Roger Sherman's apportioning of the House based on the census in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, while Section 3 guaranteed each state 2 senators. The Senate retained foreign policy powers, and legislation was required to pass through both chambers to ensure smaller states had a voice in the national government.
Compromise on representation provided context for all subsequent decisions at the convention, such as the selection and powers of the executive, apportionment of tax burden, and the relationship between state and national authority.
However, the issue of slavery proved intractable. Given the role of population and representation, Pierce Butler advocated counting slaves in a state's population. Northern delegates pushed back, with Elbridge Gerry arguing that if blacks, who were property in the South, counted for apportionment, then so should the cattle and horses of the North.
In Federalist 54, James Madison claimed that slaves were both people and property, and compromise eventually centered on Nathaniel Gorham's position that slaves were inferior to freemen and should be counted at a 3/5 rate. Additional compromises ensued, including the Future Slave Clause and the Slave Trade Compromise. Ultimately, the future of slavery was left unresolved, incurring a moral debt subsequent generations would pay in blood.
Following a catastrophic civil war, failed Reconstruction efforts, and Jim Crow laws facilitated gross mistreatment and generations of struggle for Black citizens. This chain of events deterred unity, fostered unrest, and strained our credibility on the world stage where nations may legitimately ask, how can we call ourselves free when our history is stained with inequality and restriction of liberties?
Questions regarding suffrage for women and Native Americans also went unresolved. As a result, women endured generations of second-class citizenship, and reprehensible events like the Trail of Tears, bad faith treaties, and a multitude of armed conflicts with Native tribes occurred in the absence of clear constitutional resolution.
Given the imperfect nature of the convention, the amendment process in Article 5 was foreseen. The requirement for ratification by the people also advances the confidence Washington voiced in future generations as stewards of the document, when he said, "I do not think that we are more inspired, have more wisdom, or possess more virtue than those who will come after us."
In this spirit, recent decline in political efficacy calls for restructuring of Congress and presidential election mechanisms to increase competitiveness of elections and ensure citizens' voices are heard. We believe national implementation of jungle primaries, smaller congressional districts, dividing electoral votes by districts, and including proportional elections to the House of Representatives should be pursued.
However, reforms must also include repealing the 17th Amendment to return the Senate to its original purpose from Federalist 62 and 63, and to balance increased democratization of the House. We also favor an amendment requiring elected congressional officials to take a 3-year gap between terms to encourage more rotation in office, as desired by Brutus and Anti-Federalist 62.
We appreciate your time and welcome any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now have follow-up questions from the judges. Tim, you want to start?
Sure. You used the phrase the imperfect nature of the convention. What would it have made it more or less imperfect?
One of the major issues in calling the convention was the general legitimacy of it. They felt like they needed George Washington's presence to feel like they had enough credibility to rewrite the Articles of Confederation as Washington proposed. But even he was reluctant to go and didn't participate much in the discussion.
Along with that, it was a very anti-populist convention. Had they included the people in the idea of this remaking of the Constitution, because originally they were just going to try and fix the Articles of Confederation. They ended up scrapping it, creating the Constitution we live under today. Had they made it less anti-populist and involved the people more, it would have made it a more legitimate, as Eric had said, and less real.
Going off of Avalon's point about anti-populism, they had the convention completely in secret from the people. It was really anti-populist of them to not include the people in this kind of decision. And although they did ask the states to ratify it, they did include the citizens' opinion in the decisions that they made at the convention.
And states like Rhode Island even didn't want to show up to the convention and didn't ratify it until later because they disliked how strong of a national system it became.
Well, would Rhode Island being there have made it better or worse? Speaking of populism.
Rhode Island giving its input would have made the convention more legitimate in the sense of the idea that under the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, the states were on equal footing, and not including Rhode Island in the convention. Rhode Island kind of lost their voice in the strong constitution.
Thank you.
Continuing on that, you mentioned not including Rhode Island in the convention. Rhode Island chose not to be in the convention. What could they have done to have made Rhode Island come, or have Rhode Island consider to come? And what about Vermont? Is Vermont a state?
I don't know if there were any avenues that the other delegates at the convention could have pursued to force Rhode Island to join the convention. I think could have easily been persuasion tactics, giving Rhode Island certain incentives, and also the idea that because Rhode Island was so concerned about national power, telling Rhode Island that, hey, we had this idea for the Senate where all the states are still on equal footing, maybe Rhode Island would have been more willing to participate.
Yeah, Rhode Island wasn't in favor of the idea of changing the articles. They were in a livable position that they were okay with under the articles. So the idea of changing it most likely instilled a fear in the delegates that they would have sent, saying that, what if this changes for the worst for our state and our citizens?
Going off of what my colleagues have said, it was really difficult under the articles to force the states to do much of anything. It was almost impossible for them to force the states to collect their own taxes, and that led to economic failures that led to the convention in the first place.
Thank you.
Let me ask this. I want to take us to a statement that you made about an amendment that might require a break for representatives. Can you elaborate on that? What kind of break? How many terms?
So we pulled this idea from Anti-Federalist 62, the idea that a 3-year gap between each terms, however, no term limits. The idea is to have more rotation in office so that we don't just have these same people over and over again, so that we have more representation from more people throughout the years.
And we also drove this idea from the Pennsylvania Constitution in 1787, where they had this 3-year gap in between each term, so to encourage more rotation in office. But we also find issue in the idea that extreme rotation, why elections are staggered in the Senate, avoiding the issue where we have floods of new representatives coming each election cycle. We like to implement a 20-year period where representatives are not forced to rotate, but after they reach that 20-year mark is when rotation begins.
What about this? That if you're a representative, how long does it take you to learn your job? And maybe by year 3, you're just learning your job and being very effective, and now you're out of office. And what happens with your representation of the people?
Well, the idea behind the rotation is there's a prerequisite of 20 years. So you will first serve 20 years as a representative, and then after that, that's when your rotation will kick in. So you will still have the experience built up in that knowledge, and then afterwards, that's when that will be implemented.
Okay, all right. Any other questions from the judges?
Always. You mentioned repealing the 17th Amendment as a suggestion. Why? Can you support that a little bit more on why you would do that?
So the idea of repealing the 17th Amendment is to return to the idea that the framers originally instilled into the Constitution of having those layers between the people and government, so that not everything is swayed by popular excitement, much like the House is. With the senators being elected by the state legislature rather than the people, it adds that layer of refinement so that they don't have to worry about anything swaying too quickly.
I also find that it's really important to keep distinction between the House and the Senate. While the House has proportional representation for the citizens, we included a Senate in the Constitution because they needed to represent states equally, and having the 17th Amendment in place really puts the Senator's representation more towards the citizens, where it should be distinct from the House.
Was there any good reason for the 17th Amendment to begin with?
Well, the 17th Amendment was passed in around 1917, was an attempt to limit trust busting and a way to mitigate the effects of having representatives that didn't represent the people very well. But in the end, after the 17th Amendment was passed, most of the same senators were elected by the people anyway. So the 17th Amendment didn't really have the intended effect that the intended it was supposed to have.
Thank you very much for your comments. We will now have feedback from the judges. Okay. Tim?
Well, I guess I'll start. I think you laid a great groundwork for why we had the convention. You mentioned Shay's economics and the inflexibility of the articles on certain things. You went through the major players at the convention, the Virginia plan and how that evolved and actually drove the discussion. You mentioned the slavery issue, and I'm intrigued by your proposals. Restructuring Congress, districting, electoral reform. So your opening statement was really well done. I think your follow-ups were solid as well. And I especially liked your reference to Brutus. I mean, a day without Brutus is like a day without sunshine. This is totally trivial. But I know where you got this anti-federalist 62 stuff. I would suggest, and as you probably well know, there's no such collection of anti-federalist papers. Somebody much later numbered them that way. So tell me which Brutus, because a lot of people would want to know that rather than anti-federalist 62. But that has nothing to do with how I'm scoring here. It's just one of those little quirks that I have. But I think one of the things I really appreciated, because I wasn't quite sure that you understood why we had a 17th Amendment to begin with. So I was very impressed that you were able to say, yes, we do understand why we have a 17th. And you got to the issue of the trust dominating the Senate. So I appreciated you being able to caveat your comments with eliminating the 17th. So the historical background matters, and I appreciated that in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your presentation on it, and some of your suggestions were quite interesting coming from Michigan. We didn't quite have time to talk about it since Michigan is full on there to ask about it. But you did a nice job on talking about the Jim Crow laws and the staining of history of slavery, and then swinging that into also the women's rights and Americans, how they were not representative. So all in all, I enjoyed your presentation very much, and your follow-up was good too. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess I have a couple of comments here. I enjoyed your opening presentation. You hit a number of Shay's Rebellion. You brought in Madison, and they're, as you know, extremely important. You outlined the Virginia-New Jersey plan, which was extremely good. You even brought in Elbridge Jerry with his argument about property, and that was crucial in that North-South conflict. You also recognize what were they supposed to do at the Constitutional Convention? Were they supposed to merely amend the articles, or were they supposed to scrap it all together? I looked at and in your follow-up, I like the fact that you gave some thought. You just didn't rush into answers, but you gave some thought and reflected on them. And you came up with some pretty interesting ideas. And I like that idea of terms, giving individuals a break instead of this lifelong service in a position. So well done, and good luck to you the rest of the way.